is very important. And I think it's important because I think that we failed. And I think that we failed because we were not prepared. We didn't have everything we need. Nobody's gone through a pandemic, 2 hurricanes, and an ice storm before, right? But I think hopefully this will better prepare us in doing things like this. For me, one of the first things that needs to take place is cleaning house. I think that in a lot of our agencies, organizations, offices, people have become complacent in their jobs. And so we need to clean house and make sure that we have the right people in the positions to do the right things to help the community. I don't want us to forget mental health. Being incapacitated in your home for a year related to a pandemic, which is a disaster for us, not being able to have access to your home, your family after a hurricane. We have to think of the people that don't have transportation, have very little funds, things like that. So the mental breakdown that it does to someone, we need to make sure that that's all there. Possibly having something like a Unity Center, the FEMA Dome, where when we go through a disaster, people have somewhere to go. You know, when you're in healthcare, you're required to have an emergency plan, and part of your emergency plan is how many people will stay and do the evacuation, how many will stay and do the food. We need to have something like that in terms of primary care, behavioral care, mental and social services, to make sure that people have what they need. And it can't. We have to ensure that the people that we pay to make sure that they lead us well in this city, in this parish, are serving everybody in the parish. And I just think that didn't happen with this most recent disaster. And again, this can't be a complaining session, but I think that we need to use these satellites or make sure we have a healthcare center ready to go on that side of town, a healthcare center post-disaster ready to go on this side of town. And then people just have to make sure that their families are okay. But if you're on call to be in that facility day one after the disaster, let's make it happen. So that's just a little bit of my thought. Braylon?
One, I definitely agree with everything that you've shared, and especially your area of expertise. I think that's absolutely important. Again, I think this is another place of collaboration where people have to work together. I know personally for our church, we meet before the storm even came. We said, listen, we're not, we had done the whole COVID feed people thing, and so we told Southwest Louisiana Health Services, whatever happens, we're partnering with you on this one. Mm-hmm. And I think really, and what it turned out is that there was a community center where it almost turned into a one-stop shop for a little while. And I think that's very, very important. And I think we can continue to build upon that. But I also believe those areas should be designated before the storm, yes. Right? And so we're, 54 days before hurricane season. I think I was thinking somewhere 17 named storms, 4 majors are already announced. One of them is named Claudette, which is, concerning, because there's always some interesting names to come get you. And so, we need to know before, and Omega brought this up so well, wherever you are, you already need to know who to call. Yes. The moment when you leave, you need to know where the first stop is coming yes. back in. Versus, because one of the things we do know that communications went down. Cell phones, so now trying to tell people where to go on the other side of the storm was horrible. I remember, literally having to go to South Lake Charles to coordinate events in North Lake Charles just to get a signal. And so we already had those places designated. And I think it just continues to go back to these one-stop shops to consolidate these efforts and pull things together, I think are very, very important. But I agree, the mental health is very, very important, and I definitely have to add the spiritual health yeah. Of individuals. And so I think when we talk about these things, we've got to have government. We have to start seeing the synergy between church and state instead of the separation between church and state. We've got to see, especially in moments of disaster, that's when that synergy has to be real. And we've got to learn how to capitalize on it and maximize it in those moments. And so I think it's understood in moments like that the church comes to the rescue a lot of times of the government in moments like mm-hmm. that. People realize in those moments, that's why churches exist, because we wind up doing most of the work that the government can't do at that particular point in time. I wish that respect will stay through periods, and we can continue to build upon those coalitions that we form in disasters and utilize those throughout even what we like to call the disaster relief blue sky days as well.
Anyone else?
My biggest thing is always, our senior citizens. We do a lot of work where we come across those who just doesn't have access to some of the stuff you guys say. So I do think something like a community center where they have a designated area where they can go to would be a great idea. But we're currently working on a mini documentary on North Lake Charles, and the people we come across are in their 50s and 60s and they're just struggling and they don't know where to go to get these resources. So when we talk about mental health, social health, any kind of health, I just want to make sure we keep them in mind because they're a big portion of this population. I don't think a lot of people are like that.
Absolutely.
And I think even in the way we communicate, right? I think we have become social media dependent, and that does leave out a very significant population in many times and in many ways. And so I think it is a challenge to figure out how best to communicate with the non-social media population. I think we've become, super dependent on social media for so much, but we do have seniors out there that are not on social media. We've got young people that are not on social media that many times can be left out of the loop. And I think really having a conversation, and I think this mini documentary could be a great way to look at it as well. What are the ways that they're still receiving their news? Is it the newspaper? Is it the 5 o'clock or the 6 o'clock news? And really, finding out the best ways to do, or is it the mail? You know what I mean? Do we need to do mail droppers or whatever the case may be? Which is something, especially as young people, we don't even think about anymore. I mean, nobody thinks about the mail. You know what I mean? But if that's the way we need to go to make sure that we can communicate those things, I think we have to kind of, have that emphasis, or at least someone in those conversations that will remember the value of the mail.
The continuation of that, because when the storm hits, the ones that are still here, if we're all not evacuated, we came back, mail didn't run properly for
2 or 3 months.
2 or 3 weeks.
Right.
Newspapers didn't have consistent manner for a few weeks later. So we have to see how do we communicate, but also how do we continue that communication in times of a storm. So I think that's one thing we need to look at as well, the continuation of communication.
And I think that's where it comes to if they knew where to go.
Yeah.
So even if they weren't receiving mail or the news wasn't on or whatever the case may be, they can say, well, let me ride up here. And they're more likely to do that when, again, there's a kind of one-stop shop. But Brandon, I think that's a great thing that we have to kind of keep on the forefront of our mind. I mean, one, I think the office, the Council on Aging, their facility is gone for all practical standpoints. And I think one of the things we should, talking about health and social services, I think their facility coming back stronger and better needs to be a top priority. I think that needs to be very, very high on the list to figure out a way to support them as best we can. But also, in that same light, do satellites for them as well. Because one location, on the south end of town on 14, and grandmother don't go past 14. Don't get on 14 because she'll drive in her community, but she's not driving on 14. You know what I mean, or whatever the case may be. I think when we talk about especially senior citizens, those community hubs are even more so important because many times they'll tool in their community, but again, you're not going beyond their community. Speaking of health as well, I think it's also important to bring up the food deserts. Right, I think someone would definitely, others who might have be in the room would definitely want to bring that up as a concern as well. That's something that we need to really focus on, is making sure that there's healthier food accessible in every community as well, because that definitely goes into the challenge of our health and building long-term sustainable health solutions as well. Because we know even with COVID-19, if we were the best way to fight COVID-19 was be healthy when you get it. You know what I mean? Or whatever happens. And so being able to sustain and have strong and sustainable health incentives and initiatives within the community, I think are very important.
Ms. Pre-May? Pastor?
I was just going to say that, and I don't have all the details of data, but any efforts to make sure that what I would call at-risk populations, you know, and everything from our seniors to adults and or children who may be in abusive situations, domestic abuse with women and or men, children who are at risk of being underfed or mistreated. Take a look at the reality of a lack of facilities when it comes to shelters and places where not only a woman and her children can go, but where a man can go and his children, or where children who don't have the mother or the father. I think all those things just need to be things that we look at, so that if and when something happens 10 years, 20 years, 40 years from now, that there's a mechanism and a network in place for those things. And then, frankly, and to the extent that it can be done, something as simple as if a man is paying child support and then the pandemic happens, the hurricanes happen, you lose your job, or now you're underemployed, you're working, but you're not making what you were making. I think we don't have to look far to realize that our communities are normally those who are most adversely affected by these kinds of things. And so if you have someone who's trying to keep their life on the right track, who maybe had made some bad choices, but then disaster strikes, and now, and to the little bit of knowledge I do have, it can be very dangerous, because if you miss a payment in any particular situation, even if some things are out of your control, that can significantly affect your status, and I mean that can create a whole domino effect of other things that affect the family, affect, you know, someone who's trying to do the right thing but may not have all the resources, the knowledge. So I just think all those things, anyone that's at risk, you know, we should ensure that we, you know, make every effort to put things in place so that those persons can receive the health services, social services, for sure.
So that becomes, which is not one of the issues, so we're not gonna touch it, but that becomes a justice issue. You know, dealing with the justice system as well. While we're looking at all these recovery functions, one of the recovery functions that's, you know, not listed, probably hadn't been thought about, but is a justice function. You know, we need to look at it well.
Yeah, no, that's, yeah, I mean, especially when you start talking about, child support and even probation, right? That, yeah, you miss a visit or you wasn't supposed to leave state, but that's the only place you can. I mean, that could, yeah, that could turn into, and even now, you know, court is backed up. But I don't know how far the court is backed up right now as far as that's concerned as well. And how to get those individuals, the grace that they need, but also the assistance that they need, to get back in right standing. No, that's, yeah. And that will become a health issue if you're worrying about it and anxious about it and those things as well. So, but I think Elijah is right. We may need to petition and say there might need to be another function here about the justice fund. Maybe, Mr. Terry, where, Mr. Police rather, where would the justice issues, like criminal justice issues, fall on this spectrum?
I think like Elijah said, I think it's been thought about, basically. So, basically, the framework that's being used is EMA's framework for recovery, and that's probably not something that's come up before.
Yeah. And would you say that point would rise to the level of being a major point on the framework? Why if you do, why or why not? As far as how?
I think that it could. I think if we're talking from the perspective of from African American standpoint, certainly the judicial criminal justice system impacts us more than others, and so it probably does need to be taken into consideration. So certainly, if it's not its own recovery support function, certainly it should be identified in one of the existing as a priority problem.
And even going farther on that, and I know I'm way over my time talking this topic, but going further in that is, and I mean, it really is really an intriguing idea, because especially here, because our jail is gone.
Yeah.
You know, which means, if you're talking about just the inmates being relocated, that's one thing. But when you talk about the inmates not being able to communicate with their lawyers, not being able to communicate with their family, and all of those pieces, not being able to get to court at a decent time, or whatever the case may be, I think that should be something that's thought through, even as a preparation matter of where are inmates going, and then how does that criminal justice system, where they're going, make room for them to stay on a reasonable process to, you know, whether getting out or whatever the case may be, that it might be. That's,
I think it's an excellent point. I was listening to Pastor Williams just a second ago concerning the issue if someone's on parole. I mean, I think that's a very valid point. And if they're continuing to try to make a living and do the right thing, where's the flexibility within the system or the connection so that that person can possibly be transferred to another location, or their case rather can be transferred to another location? So that does make sense. So I think, going back to Elijah's point, I just don't think that this issue has ever been brought up. So we may be on the cusp of developing something new here as it relates to recovery support functions.
I want to prompt Ms. Webb over there. She's, what, 20 years in the health industry? 30, 40? Okay. I know it's been a while. Anything that you would add as far as how we recover and how we move forward, or how we respond as far as health is concerned?
I think health issues start being so young from being brought up, but the forum, because we could get the forums out, and I think the way to reach a lot of people is through the church, because that's the home base for a lot of our socialization, teaching, spirituality, and the church is basically the foundation, with health fairs through the churches, like some of the churches have been doing, and just to teach it through the word, to let us know that God don't want us just spiritually fit, He wants us physically fit. And that's all part of our growth, but through the churches, through the schools, if we can, to reach the parents, to let them start learning about what's important to feed our children. You know, snacks are okay. Sometimes when I be walking and I meet kids and they say, "Can I have some candy?" I say, "You want your tea?" You know, do you want your tea? And you know, things like that, just to inspire them to try to eat an apple or orange, but we will have to take it upon ourselves, even if we're not in the healthcare field, that if you need a job, talk to them about different foods. It's just simply talking to them. And I would take that opportunity to walk around in the city and pick up trash, and that gave me a chance to talk to people. And that really, they would come to me after that and they would say, "I ate an apple." But it was, tell them the consequences of the choice.
Yes.
And I could see a difference in some of them, and I say, "You want your teeth, you want that pretty small? You want to keep running fast?" And that made a difference with them, just interacting with them on that way. But we have to get out into the community and do things that put us where people know we're interested. Like I said, I would go around through the community and just pick up trash. I'd have people waving at me, giving me coat money. But it was getting out, and once I got out, I could talk to them about different things. And diet, health, and that's what I would incorporate.
Could I echo what, support something she said? I think it made me think about the idea that whether it's health and social services or everything all the bullet points, if you will, all the emphases that we're covering, that there needs to be a sense in which there's both a proactive element, preventative measures, which is what she's talking about, and then also the intervention side as well. I think both are necessary to look at something holistically. So something as simple as my wife found these fruit stripes. They're like little fruit roll-ups. healthier, so that now not only do they eat them, but I eat them. I told them we need to get 2 sets.
2 boxes.
2 boxes, because I'm gonna need a box, because I'm gonna snack on it. But I mean, but seriously, food deserts, which is what, you brought up, Pastor Harrison, so I think she's right. We get ahead of it as we move forward, after, in the aftermath of the disasters, so that next time, not only are we responding to intervene, but we've already also, as she said, as you all have said, we've already done things in advance as well. So I think both can serve us well.
On the justice aspect, one of the ways, and I think we did talk about this earlier about collaboration, is to find out more, is to meet with probation and parole, to see what their plan of action was, because they have to, and in law enforcement period, even with, no matter what entity it is, they have to have a plan of action that's proactive, that's intervention, and then that is even after the effects of the disaster or whatever it might be. So, for probation and parole, and let's say with the sheriff's office of the city, when you have offenders, sex offenders, for registry and things, they have to have a plan of action where they follow those individuals, and maybe we can find out more and even provide answers to individuals that may contact us. Hey, I'm on probation. What do? I have to evacuate. Well, sitting down and communicating and saying, okay, good. I'm glad you called. Here's a list. Or here's who you have to contact. Here's the steps that you have to take, because they have to have a plan. We may not know the full plan, but there is one that they provide, and also that plan has to be communicated with those individuals that they service. So maybe, getting with them to find out what procedures did they follow during, and again, this was definitely a year, but however, there has to be a plan of action that is enforced, and that can be enforced during times like we experienced the past year. So, but that is a good aspect, because we get a lot of individuals calling and asking, I don't want to, I lost my job, or whatever the case might be, but there is a plan. So maybe we can just communicate with those entities that have drawn that up and have developed those to address situations like what's occurred last year.
Good? Great suggestions and ideas. Thank you so much. We're going to move on to our 4th support function, housing. Its mission is to establish an integrated framework of housing strategies that stabilize and secure all community needs to strengthen the housing market, integrate mitigation measures, and build inclusive and sustainable communities. And this is all post-disaster for recovery. Here we are today, 8 months out, 7.5 months out from 2 hurricanes, right? I tell you, I know people who are still paying mortgages with holes in their house, with roofs that are not repaired, with mold growing. I know people who received an insurance check for $5,000 that's not nearly enough to cover the damages that are pay for the repairs that's required for the repair of their home. It's not fair. They don't have the money to go to an attorney, right? If they do, they don't know. Some of them are not educated on where to go, who to go to. And so I think that the first step, this resource fair that took place today, was a great step, a one-stop shop, right? And so, however, it is making sure that all these people are educated about it. So how do we get the biggest dilemma is how do we get this information to them? We have to it's almost like Maslow's hierarchy of need, right? If you don't have a home to go to, right? Then what do you have? You don't have safety, you don't have food, you don't have health, you don't have your spiritual, because that's where your Bible is. So we have to make sure that people have homes to go to. We are still having a hard time putting trailers out, from what I understand, because we can't find the property to put them on. Am I correct? Mm-hmm. So we have to work on a integrated network beforehand to make sure that we are able to bring our citizens back home to Lake Charles. For me, so many of my staff have relocated out of state. And I can't tell you how how that makes it such a bigger picture, because when I do get my people back in my building, I won't have staff here to take care of them. And if I do have staff coming back and they're paying rent, the rent is sky high, so it's not worth it. I feel like some of our landlords are price gouging, you know? So we have to make sure, we have to put in efforts to make sure that price gouging doesn't happen, that we don't have slumlords for landlords, that everybody can come home to their home, their city, their parish. And so to me, it's getting the education out there. So that's a big thing for me, because I know that we don't have people to work here because they don't have houses to come home to. So, floor is open.
No covering here, but some of these stuff is still affecting me personally. And speaking of evictions, I think one thing people should be educated more on is the notifications that come on their doors. A lot of people assume that once you get the notification, you have to move out. You are due your day in court. I think a lot of people don't know that, and a lot of people have been kicked out of their homes because of that situation without going to trial. So piggybacking off some of the judicial information that you passed out, that's the big thing that people email me about is, hey, is this a legal document? And I'll forward it to Bobby Holmes or somebody. But it's always just a notification on the door, and it scares a lot of people. And right now, it's very hard to find rent because everything is $1,100 and up for a 2-bedroom. So I think that's helping people be educated on the rules and what is qualified as an eviction, what is not, and what the landlord can and cannot do.
Perfect. Sure.
Interject? Normally, I probably would not interject, but I'm going to this time because it just so happens this particular support function, I'm leading that effort. So, and everything that you're saying, I think is correct. What the young man here is saying, that's basically some fair housing issues that we need to deal with to make sure that people are aware, especially if they're renters, of landlord-tenant rights, property evictions. I think that is very important. I think also your point, Nomika, as I thought about this, is on point. Consumer education is very important to make sure that people are not the victims of fraud and scam, because ultimately it's going to cost us as taxpayers more money if they fall victim. So we're going to have to work with the state, other entities to make sure that we have strong measures in place. I've actually had some conversations with the Office of Community Development within the last couple of weeks. And I think that they're going to be creating a program where homeowners will be able to call the state and have someone assigned to them to help them to navigate through the process.
Yes.
So there's some discussions about that.
Yes.
So I do believe that consumer education is a big piece of this.
Yes.
I think you're exactly right.
Yes.
The other challenge that we're going to have, as I see it, is we have to address emergency temporary housing challenges. I think it was Pastor Williams who said earlier, if I heard correctly, about the lack of shelters and so forth in our community. So it's not just about being able to get the shelters, because we can probably get them built. It's about the operation of the shelters on an ongoing basis. Who's going to step up and take that lead? And is it going to be a strong enough nonprofit organization that's going to be able to do that? Because this is definitely not, in my opinion, this is not the role of government.
Yeah.
Okay, government should not be involved in that arena. Now, unfortunately, we may or may not have a large enough pool of nonprofit organizations that have that type of capacity. So we have a lot of nonprofits, but many of them, they don't have that kind of money. There's only maybe a few around here that, may even have $1 million budget, So that's going to be a challenge for us. Then, the other issue that we have to try to figure out is the permanent housing issues, okay, for both renters and homeowners. And how do we incentivize developers to come in and to build what we know that needs to be built? And it's not, it's not just a maintenance that's needed, you know what I'm saying? And it's going to cost a lot of money to be able to do that. So also when we talk about that education piece, I think that we have to develop strategies for the various types of developers and investors. So basically, a small mom and pop is not gonna be able to have access to the same capital and so forth that some big corporation or group that may be able to come in that, and so we have to make sure that we have, products, for lack of a better term, that address all of those. Something for the mom and pop, something for the middle person, something for the big developers, as we look to try to see how we're going to be able to advance housing forward. So those are just some of my initial thoughts. We're developing a team to start working on this, so we're bringing in some folks, even through our office that we're hiring, that could work on this full time. That's the other issue, is we're talking about long-term recovery. We really do need people that's committed and dedicated to this. I'm a parish employee, but I'm busy enough. And so to take on this, on top of my normal duties, it's a lot. Willing to do it, not complaining about it, but what I am saying is that at some point, we may have to look at where we got hot folks, you know what I'm saying, in order to be able to get the job done.
Yeah.
So, I think that's enough for right now.
I definitely agree. I mean, because as I've been talking to people around the community, it's especially as it relates to people who own homes and they rent them out. We have to find some kind of incentive because they have to feel like it's still worth it. And we were recently talking to someone who said, you know, I had a lot of rent houses, but the hit that I took, I don't know if I want to continue this investment. And so I think it's going to be vital for us to find a way to continue to motivate people who have the capital to maintain this property in a way in which we could provide not just subpar, but housing that's actually to where, you know, we still have, like we were saying, we still have people who can't come back to work. And so I have a cousin right now, he's between Dallas and Atlanta, and he wants to come back, but it's no suitable housing other than being bumped up. And so those are some real challenges, I think, as it relates to, we have family properties too. And my question is, since we have this property available, what kind of incentives would someone give to develop this? Because you have all this within your access, but it has to be worth it. For the investor.
Can I just add to that? You're spot on. And as I kind of thought about this and studied it a little bit, what I'm concerned about is that most homeowners who have gotten their insurance money, which we know, someone said it, it's not adequate. Even for the homeowner, let's say that you had rental property or what have you, they may have gotten 30, 40,000, but we know that's not enough to do repairs, and it's certainly not enough to reconstruct a home. So we do have to step in with some type of incentive, and it could potentially be governmental. And I've had a radical idea, don't know if it would work, but you know, if we can float bonds to do other type of capital projects as governments, why can't we float bonds
To do this?
to do affordable housing and to encourage? Now, that's radical, and I don't know whether or not the government will be willing to do that. You know what I'm saying? But it's just kind of throwing out something, you know. And the trade-off could be float the bonds, the homeowners get the property fixed, the residents get quality housing, and then you put in an affordability component for a certain period of time. So if a homeowner takes this bond money, then you have to ensure that the unit is going to be affordable for 15 years or 30 years or something like that. And everybody benefits. Radical idea, because government, local, not just any type of government, local government, and Elijah, you worked in city government, would have to step up and to do something like that.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not they're willing to do it, that's the whole other, that's gonna be the $1 million question. So, well, I don't know about all that.
It's on the record.
Great suggestion.
I love it, yeah. I think when we think about housing too, I think we have to think about vacant land. And how we, one, identify it and utilize it as well. And because many times it's very difficult to start with something that's already developed. Even for example, if we're talking about a bond, if you're looking at something that's already developed, especially when someone's next door, well, if I buy this piece, I can't buy the great piece next door for the same price. I mean, it's just, before you get, 5 pieces, you're paying 3 times the price or whatever the case may be. So I think also, if we were talking about a bond issue, it could be wise for, the city to say, listen, let's go get this large piece of undeveloped property, and that way we can control the rate of even purchasing land or whatever the case may be, because man, that could be one of the challenges as well, is again, you get to a point where now it's not just, landlords price gouging, but landowners, start price gouging, as well. And so even developers are now stuck in this market where, man, I'd love to build 10 homes, but I can't pay $12,000 a lot. You know what I mean? That throws all my numbers off as well. So even being able to kind of get in a position where there's large swaths of land that may be available, and I'll bring it up a little bit more in the infrastructure piece, that also for the developers, we're actually helping to control that piece of it as well. Because I think a lot of times for developers, they get into that, they get stuck on that end that we think about we think about renters getting price gouged by landlords, but then we get developers that get price gouged by landowners. That then it kind of throws their numbers off. And if you buy the land at a bad price, you're sunk before you get started. And so I think that could be, even if the city or whatever would start something on that front, and maybe that's where quote unquote the adjudicated housing that may be already on our, kind of on the books could be resourced as well. And that would be one of my ideas as well, is that again, it's probably not the most economical decision to make. Economical decision to make to say, let's just offload an adjudicated property. But it's moments like this that says, are we offloading or are we investing it? Because there's hundreds, maybe thousands of properties that are adjudicated that are technically on this side of the book. You know what I mean? That it almost may be cheaper to free up and give to developers and say, let's just go get it right now. We'll figure this thing out on the back end. Because again, even when the city or government actually looks at the forecast of those properties, the possibilities of getting rid of those properties has gone significantly. I mean, the timeline of you cutting that yard just grew by 5 years probably now at this point. So you can go ahead and project out what is that cost going to look like versus clearing and just handing it, to qualified developers or making a part of this bond issue that you get a certain rate if you use a adjudicated property to develop or whatever the case may be. And again, kind of like you're saying, adding those incentives about making it affordable, but you could add another incentive to say, well, if it's affordable and built on an adjudicated property, then you get this level of incentive.
Yeah, I think what we can possibly look at, and we looked at this a couple of years ago, unfortunately it never went anywhere. There could be some challenges in government giving private developers. However, one of the things that we looked at a couple of years ago, and I would say now it's been about 10 years, maybe longer, was, actually it has been longer because it was doing RETA, is land banks. How do you take those properties and you place them in a land bank for developers to be able to develop those particular properties? And then those could be available not only to nonprofit organizations, but also for private developers as well. So I think that possibly would be the avenue to go. The challenge would be who would manage the land bank, those types of things like that. Now I think at one time we potentially had an entity that could have possibly done something like that,
right.
The North Lake Charles Redevelopment Group, but now that that's not functioning, we may have to look at some other avenue basically in order to potentially create a land bank and then take some of those properties and dump them into that land bank for development.
And just to go back, I mean, I really love the idea about the bond incentive. But
You might see some houses go up.
But that is something but you know what, in order to rebuild and not just, we can't address the immediate need and only specifically just for that particular time period. We have to be innovative and thinking about what can we do to continue on and make it last. Because, and that is something that does that, and that will help in that process, so. And hey, that the rebuilding takes place because for a number of years, even if it was just not in response to, the natural disaster, but just in response to the underdeveloped areas.
Just really quickly, the resource fair, it only took place, Friday and Saturday, correct? I think, huh?
March.
Yeah, Friday and tomorrow, today and tomorrow. So I think that being on the ground with something like this going forward for the next disaster a little bit quicker would be very, very helpful to people, because these contacts were not available to people because they were still evacuated. And some of them are still evacuated and won't be able to get here. And then if there's a recovery directory with all of those people who were at the resource fair with a name that we can get to the community, consumer education.
They do have it.
You do have that.
Yeah.
How do we get it to the community?
I have it, it was sent to me.
Okay.
And I'm sure that they're not gonna mind me sharing it.
Yes, because I would love to get it to some people.
So, actually, Red Cross did put together a directory of all of the agencies that took part of the resource fair. I don't know if they put like contact numbers or anything like that, but at minimum,
Just
I
the
think
name.
that they put the name
Yes.
and a description of the services that they
Perfect.
provide. I didn't look at it.
That's okay.
Nomika, but I'm sure that they probably do have phone numbers
Wonderful.
and that kind of thing, but yeah, I can get that.
Okay, and absolutely love the idea that someone could possibly have a caseworker to walk them through
Yeah,
this
that's
process.
going through OCD.
Yes.
We actually had a meeting with them, I had a meeting with them maybe about a week ago, maybe a week and a half ago. And this is just some of the things that they're kind of talking about at the state level, because we're really trying to position ourselves to be ready for when the billions of dollars start rolling into the state. So
Yeah.
we already know, everyone's heard
Yeah.
that the governor has already put the request in to the Biden administration. We're just waiting for the appropriation. And most people feel that that's gonna happen sometime within the next 2 to 3 months.
Okay,
And so once that happens, we wanna make sure, and that's part of the reason why we're doing this,
yes.
this plan, that we're gonna be able to hit the ground running.
Running.
So from a housing perspective, I think that the first thing that we have to do, is what Nomika said. There has to be a lot of community education. And I think that when me and my team, we really start hitting the ground running with this, I think that's gonna be the first thing that we're gonna really focus upon.
Okay.
How do we get the word out? How do we communicate with people? How do we try to prevent people from being victims of fraud and scam?
Yeah.
And then you start building on
Upon
that, from there, I think.
Very good. Well, we appreciate you. You're doing a great job.
Well,
Okay. Anybody else want to contribute? You want to move on?
I just had one quick thing, and it's really along the lines of what you all have said, and that is just, I love the bond issue. I watched my late pastor, help mobilize an effort years ago in San Antonio, Texas, where a bond, was voted down because it was gonna be put on one side of town. It was gonna benefit people that didn't look like the majority of the people who needed that benefit in the community, and they voted it down and re-voted it and put it on the side of town. It was a state-of-the-art health sciences initiative at a collegiate level, and it was done. So it can be done. I just want to say that, and then finally, I just want to say this too: the idea of the and I'll just go ahead and say it. Listen, when I go to the gas station, what I see is collective power in action. Whether it's our Middle Eastern brothers and sisters, or our Indian brothers and sisters, our Asian brothers and sisters, when you can control, when you have enough money to be able to dictate what happens on any piece of land, whether it's a gas station or a beauty salon, and you can impact the entire, you can dictate how many dollars are spent in that neighborhood, and that not only directly affects you collectively and your family, but that impacts community, that's power. And whether it's a North Lake Charles collective where we decide, for the next 10 years, all of our nonprofits and all of our private business owners who elect to become a part of it. In Africa and the Caribbean, they call it a susu, where you have a group of a financial collective where everybody puts money into a pot, and then periodically you can withdraw because you've made deposits. Well, if we scale that to build not only a bond effort, but a collective where we say, you know what, for the next 10 years, just like cities do tax initiatives where they take, a certain amount of taxes and that funds projects. Well, I mean, imagine if all of our sororities, all of our fraternities, all of our churches, all of our business owners put money into a collective, and obviously this has to be managed and operated with integrity, but then Mama Rita doesn't have to leave. So I just wanted to, I'm just thinking about land and ownership and just the ability to dictate what can happen in the community, I think can be hard.
I'll add one more thing to housing as well, and we've talked about it on our housing call. I think one of the things we have to talk about too is exposing individuals in our community to different types of housing. Whether it's, everyone doesn't need a half acre, right? Looking at multiple housing units, and again, that's not something you don't own, right? I mean, you can own a condo. You can own a townhome, you can own, or whatever the case may be. And so exposing that and educating to that point of the value of owning things that may not be, a house on its own piece of land, but it may be a condo in a building. And saying these are, and legitimizing that for people. I think here in the South, it's not, you don't have a home unless you got a yard. You know what I mean? And I think that becomes a major challenge. And how do we communicate that? How do we encourage that? How do we, educate on that point of saying, listen, if we can go north and south with homes versus east and west with homes, we can go a lot farther as long as people will accept that as a legitimate home. Again, it can be inherited, it can be sold, it can, and having those communications. And then a lot of times what happens in that as well is, if that's the case, a lot of times there's built-in maintenance that goes into that, where you don't have this dilapidation issue that sometimes we see when someone has an individual home on an individual lot, and so we start seeing, the yard's not cut, things along those lines. Whereas if you're in these, larger complexes or whatever the case may be, you still have that home, you have that ownership and that level of inheritance, and the value can continue to go up. But many times the aesthetics and the maintenance that many times becomes a challenge, sometimes built into these facilities, that many times become a challenge when you're kind of an independent situation. And so I think even having that conversation, talking about more collective and land, land banks or whatever the case may be, really also adding that component of looking at other styles and types of housing and figuring out how to make that culturally acceptable and legitimized here in a culture where, again, many times, if your house don't have a yard, you don't own a house, whatever the case may be. And again, that can be foreign to our thinking, but I think having those conversations and having the emphasis in that direction also helps developers, because you get more bang for your buck as well.
Yeah, just to add to that, you're right, we talked about this on the calls, and just so the group will know, one of the ideas that we're floating around too is to build different types of model homes in different parts of the city, so that people can be exposed to these different types, as opposed to just automatically just shutting it down. If you go in, some things you have to visually see in order for you to be able to kind of grasp the concept and for it to become palatable. I think that the other thing that we talked about, we do have to figure out what will work in various parts of the city. There's some things we just have to be honest. It's not going to work in certain parts of the city. It's just a fact. It's not going to happen. So let me just give you an example. This is just my 2 cents. Tiny homes, you ain't gonna see them south of Lake Charles, probably, 9 times out of 10. I don't think that'll happen. But some other types, maybe, So again, I think that we just have to figure it out, what will work in different parts of the city, educate people about those types of homes, build maybe some model homes so people can get accustomed to them, see them, visually see them, and then maybe from there, we may be able to start developing those types of homes in various parts of our city. So, just to add to your point.
And I'll go one step further, not only modeling the home, but even, you know, if we're gonna do a tiny home, if it's a part of a master plan tiny community,
That's
where
correct.
people can see that it's not just a home, but there's assets. So if you have a tiny home, but we're gonna build a community center in the center, that, you know, where you may not have a large living room at your house, but we've got a community living room, or so, whatever the case may be. So creating more of a master plan where whatever asset, you may not have much of a yard, but we're gonna build a major park in the center of a tiny home community. So whatever, in some way, there's some trade-off in compensation, where versus just a tiny home in the middle of a community that doesn't have those additional assets that would offset in those
No, I
master
think
plan
that's
communities.
exactly right. Yeah, if you do something like a tiny home, I think it does have to be a community.
Right.
And then you also have to figure out who's the target audience for that.
Mhm.
Now, there's various thoughts about that. Some people feel that tiny homes are perfect for homeless individuals. Maybe, maybe not. You know, it may be the millennials
Mhm.
who want that, who want less, you know what I'm saying?
The retirees.
So, again, we have to try to figure it out, where does it work, and then who do you target for that particular type of housing, I think becomes the other issue. So the type of community that you're talking about, if you look at other models across the state, and I get them all the time, places like California, that's what they're doing.
Mhm.
They're building tiny home communities because they've already done the research and the study and have made that investment, and they know that in certain parts of their community, this will work. That's what we have to do at this particular point if we're gonna be successful in addressing our housing challenges.
I think also, kind of go back on, education. One part of the education too, I believe we need to look at legal education of home ownership, successions and everything like that, because we talk about, inheritance. You know, you have a lot of people, you know, that are living in homes that was great-grandma home,
Mhm.
that was just, given to them or what have you, and then so a storm happens or if someone dies and they can't get a clear title, you know, because somebody lives off and then great-grandchildren are now all owners of one home that is deteriorated right now. And so a lot of people don't understand about successions and how to do successions, how to, get the property in your name and what all that entails. So I think that should be added as well. A legal education or, some type of, notarization from that point as well.
Just like his eviction, education.
And just to kind of wrap up everything, I don't want to forget to mention, I've seen this earlier online, a lady in North Lake Charles, she raised concerns about the abandoned hotel, the old Richmond Suite. And I guess there's been a collection of homeless people there. I read through some of the comments, some people are saying that's a place where homeless people normally go. And so she shouldn't really be complaining, but she's saying also that her home is getting broken into. So I think addressing what are we gonna do with some of these damaged infrastructure moving forward. If we don't clean them up, you're not gonna be able to bring anything on this side. Because if people see you driving down the street and see them, you're not gonna wanna invest. And if you're seeing people complaining about homeless people, I think they do need help. But it's just not gonna bring business to the side. But I just wanted to bring that to attention because it's gotten over 100 comments online, and all because she just said, this homeless person broke into my home because they're staying at this abandoned Richmond Suite. But people are saying this is.
And I believe that wasn't only homelessness, but also drug addiction as
Yeah.
well.
Yes, you're right.
Which is a great segue into the next support function, infrastructure. And so infrastructure, it says its mission is to identify, enhance, and sustain all critical infrastructure within Calcasieu Parish, which includes providing critical facilities, energy, water, transportation, wastewater, and information systems. Now, friends, in my personal opinion, I feel that we here as citizens in Lake Charles, Calcasieu Parish, have been running last in a race far too long when we were built to run first. There's no reason that our water systems should be running over and flooding the way that they are. There's no reasons, right? We should be able to fix this. There's no reason we should have dilapidated buildings to the degree that they are at, and something not being done for so long. There's no reason, right? And if we're talking about post-recovery, post-disaster, right? Why not use a lot of these buildings, make sure that they're up to code, up to par, and use it for satellite facilities? Use it for a health center, for the Unity Center. Use it that if we're not gonna do anything else with them, right? So I'm just tired of seeing so many people flee to another direction and then nothing being done about these buildings, okay? To your point. The floor. Welcome.
And I think also too, you know, we desire, or we, you know, say we would like different things, and then we, you know, go to, city meetings or what have you, and vote against our own self-interest, our own best interest rather. And so, I don't know how we put that into, into the comments, but, you know, let's look for success stories, other than always looking for ways to oppose, you know, our opportunities, you know, such as the infrastructure, such as building different things and doing different things on this side of town. So.
And I think to that point, I think we have to understand the development process.
Yeah.
As it pertains to infrastructure, how do you get infrastructure? What is the first step to get infrastructure? Where does infrastructure start? And I think that's a major piece, is that a lot of times infrastructure is laid by something you don't envision in the future. But it's the thing you didn't want lays the infrastructure for the thing you did. And so, for example, a lot of times, you know, in having been in real estate in a previous life, and you're studying how cities develop and how things structure, a lot of times they go way outside the city, build something, and work back into the city. And I think that's a concept that many times many people haven't studied or watched long enough, that many times it's not you take the inside of the city and go out. Because it's so expensive to buy the center of the city, right? You can't just go buy Ryan Street. I mean, you just can't afford it, or whatever the case may be. But you can go out and buy the swamp at Graywood and build Graywood, make enough money, and come back and buy Nelson and Lake and Ryan. And so I think a lot of times just understanding those processes, but also understanding the process that, you know, at the end of Lake Street was a mobile home park. And, you know, I mean, you look across from Kroger's, and there's a mobile home park across from probably one of the nicest stores in the city, or whatever the case may be. That block, that corner, that side of town started with those mobile home parks. Then it went across the street to townhomes. Then behind the townhomes, there's some apartments. Across the street from the apartments is where now you got some, you know, nice homes or whatever the case may be. Behind that, you got estates. But it all started, you know, at that country club in Nelson with the trailer park, and then it grew from there. And so I think when we're thinking about infrastructure, we're thinking about development, I think we have to understand the process that it goes through. And while we want to instantly, you know, have the Graywood or have whatever the case may be, we've got to understand the process of getting to that place. While I agree it should be expedited and we all want to jump to the end of the equation, I think also we have to be willing to go through that process of building up our infrastructure and our capacity. For example, east of the city, when you leave over and you go down Opelousas and you're crossing the Cooley and now you're outside of the city or whatever the case may be, lots of vacant land, particularly the golf courses out there. But you need infrastructure to make that really valuable. We're always talking about, you know, there's only one road in and one road out to the golf course area, et cetera. But that's not the only issue. There's low water pressure over there. There's no sewage over there. All of those pieces don't make that land as valuable as it could be. Whereas if you got something over there, then someone starts saying, let's lay some water lines. Let's build another water tower. You know, let's start making a plan for another road. And those things start happening where it might have happened on the back of something you weren't excited about. the infrastructure starts being laid, that then gives you the potential to do something you are excited about. So I think helping individuals understand the process of how infrastructure is developed as well.
Anyone else? Infrastructure? I agree with Braylon. I think that citizen education, resident education is so important. I think that many agencies, from the top to the bottom, from the rooter to the tutor, forget that they have to be educated. We have to be educated on basically how infrastructure is done, right? So it's, for example, did my husband and I have this conversation just the other day? Didn't we, honey?
I'm sure.
That it is the city's responsibility to come in and provide the infrastructure so that businesses can come in, right? So I didn't even realize that. And just having a conversation with him. So if I didn't know it, how many other people don't know it? But yet they sit around and say, what's not being done for us? So it then becomes our responsibility, I'm sorry, Braylon, I know this is not the way you want me to go. Our responsibility to hold people in office accountable, right? Hold people accountable and go vote. So that's my biggest thing. But I do want to see change, and I'm tired of seeing transportation that doesn't reach everybody. Right? We have to have transportation for all people, access to it. I rode a city bus for many years, right? Anyway, sustainable communities post-recovery. Anybody have anything else they want to add to this topic of infrastructure?
I'll just add here, I think we would be remiss to not go back to the drainage issue because I know particularly for our friends over in the terrace and areas along those lines, you know, I know at one point there was a conversation about a large retention pond, particularly off of McNeese, between McNeese and Fifth Avenue, back over in that section. I was recently on Facebook and heard that was somehow not done. I thought it was being done. I thought I saw trucks going back there. But obviously, whatever the case may be, I don't think that retention pond was built there. But when we consistently see flooding like places like the Terrace or whatever the case may be, I think there should be a large-scale retention area that is designed on the Cayuchi Coulees somewhere. Obviously, whether it's the pumps are slow or whether they were put in reverse or whether the bayou it flows in wouldn't allow the water to go, whatever the case may be, to me, especially those in the Terrace or whatever the case may be, have suffered too much. I know, for example, we're all talking about, you know, Rita and then of course the two hurricanes we face now. But 3 or 4 years ago, during Harvey, you know, they flooded, and so it's been 3 or 4 things for them. I mean, I'm talking to people and been in homes that I went in and helped muck out for a flood that are now doing hurricanes, then back again for another hurricane, and then finally got sheetrock in, and then the winter storm came, and then, I mean, we're terrified the other day when, you know, on a regular Monday spring rain, you know, the Cayuchi Coulee was to the brim, and everybody back there, you know, was struggling to try to figure out, well, man, if this thing if it would have rained Tuesday like it was predicted, they just knew they were going to flood. And so at this point, I think when we talk about, you know, infrastructure, especially when we talk about our waterways or whatever the case may be, something has to be done on the Cayuchi Coulee path to make sure that particular community does not flood in any near future. Because I think for them, it has happened too many times. And I understand that, of course, you know, doing something here could put another community at risk or whatever the case may be. But I think we need to look at something somewhere along the Cayuchi Coulee, you know, whether it's from the Terrace north, that could try to mitigate that flooding as that water is coming in into the Terrace. One, because that's the way it's drained, and we need to consider that. And I think there's plenty vacant land along that particular tributary to say, listen, we can offload some of this water. If we buy these 30 acres or 40 acres, we can offload some of this water, slow some of this water down, because there's a ton, I mean, large sections of land right along the Coulee. I mean, almost from 90 all the way to the river, that easily could say, let's just buy this and utilize it in some way, shape, form, or fashion?
Well, I think, you have a couple issues with that. When you look at development, going back to development, talking about housing and what have you, the way we properly build is gonna be, a way to look at how that water actually drains off.
Mhm.
All of the city water actually, in essence, goes right there to that coulee.
Mhm.
Right there at Oak Park Boulevard, you have the concrete coulee. Well, it goes actually all the way past 18th Street, all the way down through there, and one half goes to Contraband Bayou, the other half goes to Cauchy Bayou, or Coulee. And what happens is when we do all this building and people talk about putting concrete down, and every time someone wants to develop something, going to the parish meeting and city meeting, you always see the first thing they talk about is drainage. Well, there is a reason for that, because you have to build properly, because if you don't, that actually will deteriorate your drainage, because concrete is there, it has nowhere to go. It again builds up in these coulees, and as you say, the retention pond would help with that. The other thing is litter. When you're stopping, we always talk about there's a drainage problem. There's really not so much a drainage problem as it is an obstruction problem. You have obstruction of these drainage laterals. And so if we can get those drainage laterals cleared out and clean, which is the reason why they built a concrete ditch from Fifth Avenue all the way down to the Cauchy Coulee behind the terrace, is because of that. Because, they wouldn't have to now go back and mow and clear it out. But if we had an opportunity to clear out all these drains, an excavator, that down through all of them, which of course is funding, it's not something you can do overnight. But if we could clear out, the drainage laterals, clear out, if you go, actually, one of my pet peeves I always say I want to stop and actually clear it out. Enterprise Boulevard at I-10, 210 and Ryan Street. If you ever get stopped at the red light right there, just look to your left where the drainage comes in.
Mhm.
All those drains are covered. Those grates, they're covered with debris, with leaves, with hay, and what have you. So water has nowhere to go. It's gonna back up. It's gonna flood in that area. That's why 210 and Ryan Street is always flooded right there at that little at the red light. So if we can clear out those drainages, if we can do litter programs, of course, the city has litter teams, the parish has litter teams and things like that. They do as best as they can, but I believe each of us as individual citizens have to take responsibility in that as well. And like Sister Well talked about, go and pick up litter and things like that. Nomika did the other day, created a team to pick up litter. I know many other people did with the Lake Charles clean the city the other day. If we can continue to do that, I think that helps also with the drainage, and it's not as expensive. So.
Sister Alexander, welcome. Glad to have you. You have anything you want to add?
It's so late, I'm just enjoying the conversation.
Oh, jump in at any time.
We are here all the time, so no matter what time, jump in.
Just one more thing as it relates to the issue that Rylan talked about, which is term hazard mitigation. We also may have just the reality that because there's repetitive flooding in those areas, that it just may be time to
Move.
move them out.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that has to become a part of the conversation, and if it does become a part of the conversation, it goes back to the consumer education
Yes.
piece to make sure that people are being treated fairly.
Yeah, because my parents have been there for 50, 60 years, and they have not only had the most recent floods, but they flooded in the 70s. They had a flood in the 80s. So they have constantly rebuilt and repaired their home. And so I agree with you. Maybe it's time to do something but make sure that they're treated fairly. And citizen education is going to be very, very key.
I think also too, and you kind of touched on it, Ms. Gilbert, earlier about transportation. I think we can't, not discuss transportation, public transportation, where we, look at how do we create a public transportation system that is cool, that is hip to be able to ride the buses.
Yeah.
And then also have it where the routes are re-examined, that they're going to the right places at the right times, and then also that they extended hours. We've heard in the last, campaign, the mayor's campaign, even, the campaign before then, we talked about transportation. You can't even go to LaBerge and go to Nugget on the bus, and not necessarily for people who wanna go and participate in gaming, but people who wanna work there. And if they do get the closest, spot, which is, I believe, Target, and they have to walk the rest of the way, well, when they get off work at 10, 11 o'clock at night, they're stuck. They have no way to get back home. So we need to look at how, to expand transportation, how to look at the funding structure of that. I know it is with FTA, the federal government do provide some funding, the city provides the other part of the funding. There's of course, with the parish, I believe, have a paratransit system. Y'all still have that, CCOA?
We do, well,
Yeah.
both of us.
Okay.
CCOA has a program, we have a program,
Mhm.
but different funding mechanisms through Department of Transportation. So
Okay.
we're 53,
More
they're
statewide.
5310.
Okay, all right. So things like that, I believe we need to look at transportation mechanisms as well, to see how we can expand that.
Speaking of transportation, one of the crazy ideas I once had about transportation, he threw out a crazy idea, which was a brilliant idea, by the way, was, of course, we're always talking about the bridges, right? Particularly I-10 bridge, but just in general, the bridges. I don't know what happened yesterday on the bridges, but I mean, both of them was chock-a-block yesterday. I was trying to get over to Westlake, I gave up. But one of the things that I've talked about as well is we've got a lot of railways. And I think we forget about there's other modes of transportation other than just our roadways. That there's railways as well. And when we start thinking about other cities and we start thinking about railroads, they're maximizing their rails as well. And one thing we've got here in Southwest Louisiana is a ton of rails. And looking at how we can better integrate those into public transportation as well. One of the ideas I kind of pitched a couple times was having an industrial commuter rail. So, having where all individuals that are working at the plants would go to one place, jump on a train, and you run them across the bridge. Every plant has a rail spur. You just drive them straight into the plant. Everybody gets off, train backs out, goes to the next plant, and you would take a ton of cars off the road every single day. Which to me, at the end of the day, when you're talking about $1 billion bridge, at least you could do this for much less, and at least lengthen the lifespan and usage of the bridge. And then again, trying to help people get in we talked about this in housing, accept the realities of, you are somebody if you don't have a car. Right, and that's okay. You know what I mean? Which is here in the South, that's not a thing, right? You gotta have a car, you gotta have a house, you gotta have a yard, you gotta have a car. Those are not necessarily things that are essential to your success. We can build, but to do that again, we've got to build models, like we talked about on housing, of other options. And I think one of the ways to do it on the transportation side is if we started with this industrial commuter rail, which I think we can get plants involved in, as far as helping funding and things along those lines. One, that workers would show up on time because the train's gonna be on time, right? I mean, it's not gonna matter if there's a wreck on the bridge and now you got a whole shift stuck for 2 hours or whatever the case may be. So I think it could be an asset to them. The rail spurs are obviously already there as well. And then I think it would also lay that model for people to start thinking, now what if there was a train that just went from North Lake Charles to South Lake Charles? Or whatever the case may be, it would start kind of laying that model that, man, if the plant workers are riding the train to work, well then I can too, or I can ride the bus to work, or whatever the case may be, and you start laying those models for more modern and hip and cool transportation methods throughout our city. And I think we have to think also, because this is the parish, throughout our region. Someone should be able to get from DeQuincy to Lake Charles, Vinton to Lake Charles, in a more public transportation type of system as well, which would help some of our outlying areas grow as well.
Including health, people don't have access to health, so just transportation is a big issue. Any other comments before we hit our last function of the night? Okay. Last function of the night is natural and cultural resources. Its mission is to return the community's cultural, natural and environmental assets and systems to pre-disaster or improved conditions. The floor is open.
So, I'll go first. I think culturally speaking, I think we have a ton of culture, that has to be maximized in some way, shape, form, or fashion. And I see it as, when we talk about, Gosport and the Terrace and the Village and the Car Shop, I think those things should be embraced, by the city. And it's almost kind of like, the Bronx and having these boroughs, within our city, and actually helping those communities develop a marketing package of what does Gosport mean? What does it look like? What does it feel like? Where's the center of Gosport? Where's the community? Where does the community meet? What does the marketing look like? What's the logo? What is the signage on the side of the road? The street signs when you're in that community. What do they look like? And developing, I think culture is one of the critical points to building a community. And I think there has to be some, I think it goes back to this master planning thing as well, that we have to, and I think communities need assistance with this, but I think it could be a great benefit to the city and the parish to help cities or communities say, listen, this is your name. What does that mean? What does that look like? What are some aesthetics that we can add to that particular community that maybe they can't find anywhere else in the city? And then hoping and desiring that when you come to Lake Charles, it's kind of like, I think it's 5 boroughs in New York, whatever it is. It's almost like when I go to New York, I want to visit all 5. I want to go to all 5. And so I think that should be something that's a reality in Lake Charles, that if you come to the casino, you ought to say, man, I got to go see Gosport. There's something over there that I can't get over here. But also going back to talking about the second locations and the satellites, but also cross-marketing. And so, there should be a brochure stand at LaBerge that markets things that are going on across the city, where people are now wanting to say, listen, I know I'm here, but I think I'm gonna stay another night because I want to go see the other side of town, or whatever the case may be. So I think it's helping communities develop their cultural relevance and their cultural identity, helping them market that and aesthetically develop that, but also cross-marketing that in other communities across the city as well.
I think
Yeah.
That's what Elijah was saying.
One thing I noticed, I'm not from around here. Just came out here from school, where they ended up staying after working at KPLC, and I just ended up staying out here. And one of the reasons why we started our company was to kind of shine a light on things that's going on here on the north side of town, and to bring marketing and news to this part of town. But I spoke about the mini documentary that we're working on. One thing I found out about interviewing some of these people is some of these historical landmarks that you guys used to have. People kept telling me about balls. Now people used to go there a lot of time to party and celebrate and different things like that. I think we should highlight those areas, bring it back a little bit, make it somewhere, like you said, an attraction place for people to come to Gosport. I didn't have no idea about some of these places until I spoke with people that was in their 60s, and they explained me about that. But I also know between us, I know Terrell, Anthony, Raj, I know you do a lot of work or used to do a lot of work in photography. There are a lot of little companies around here who do marketing and media. And if we can find resources to bring us together or to fund some of the projects we have, I think we can shine light on a lot of stuff that's going on here. But I know for us it's been really nice to hear people's response to some of the things we've allowed people to show. But like I said, we're limited to social media. But it may be something like a newspaper stand that we can put at the casino. Or I know you talked about Gumbo, or something like that again. So there's a lot of little places I didn't know about until doing my research. And I think if we can shine a light on those places again, it can kind of make a little spunk back to the north side.
I love that idea. I love that idea. And encouraging people to go there through marketing, right? so often we wanna go to another side of town because, but you know, we have to encourage people to come here through cross-marketing because there is value, and there is value here on this side of town, and so, yeah, huh?
Loving ourselves.
Loving ourselves.
I also think we have to, just thinking about the natural resources, understand that, you know, we are, you know, a place that does industry, all of those things. And I think we have to see all of those things as a part of our communities, right? When I think about just from my understanding of the history, even of Black enterprise, there was community, there was business, and there was industry. The trifecta was all right there the whole time. And so I think that is a key part to understanding that all three are part of the culture. All three are critical for a strong community. Because I think when we start thinking about industry, if someone can walk to a $25 an hour job, that's great. I mean, that's an excellent situation because you kind of cut out, well, I've got to get across the bridge, or I've got to get south of town, or I've got to get over here. And so, you know, I know many times, you know, those things are kind of shunned as far as industry and things along those lines. But I think we've got to find a way to synergize those within our communities because it is great that, you know, we talked about even, you know, those who may be, you know, incarcerated, probation, just getting out, or whatever the case may be. We know transportation is not the greatest, but if there is an industry in our community where, son, if you can just get up and walk 4 blocks that way, you can make $15 an hour, you know, whatever the case may be, there is, to me, a real asset. While there are some offsets to that as far as having industry in your community, there's some real assets to having somewhere where you can make $15, $20, $25 an hour. You know, if Johnny just get out of bed and walk 4 blocks that way, or ride his bike 4 blocks that way, or whatever the case may be. And so I think we have to, as we're beautifying our community, as we're doing those things, I think we got to have a conversation about, you know, not pushing all of the industry out, but seeing how can we blend that into what we have, because there's some real asset. And here's another point to that. When we start talking about partners in education, a lot of times maybe a small mom and pop can't be a major partner in education, but if you got an industry that's in your community, they can write some major checks, okay, to help some of these other projects, whether it's a park, whether it's the school, or whatever the case may be. And so while I think we've got to be selective, and I think we've got to hold, you know, industry accountable when it's near and dear to our families and in our communities, I think we also have to see it as an asset and a partner, and be selective in what we allow in and how we allow it in and how we can, again, hold it accountable and have it regulated, but also see that here in Southwest Louisiana, industry is part of is a part of what we do. And while we want to make sure that we're protecting nature while we're doing it, protecting our culture while we're doing it, but I think we have to look at, because of the way we're designed, industry is a major part of that culture. And how do we connect with that in ways in order to keep them in our community, but also make them responsible citizens and corporations within our communities as well.
One quick thing to kind of go over what you said. I know you talked about kind of micro and staying here, but my mother, she's a project manager on Fort Polk, and also mentioned that I work over there. There's a lot of times when she comes to me and be like, Brandon, do you know somebody who can work audio? Do you know somebody who can work video? I need somebody ASAP. Fort Polk is constantly hiring people. And I think I know it's a little bit further out, but as far as transportation, if we can ever come up with, I always wanted to put that bug in the politician's ear. If there's any way we can work on maybe some kind of transportation middle ways to get some of these people to Fort Polk. There's so many jobs and so many resources out there for people, from a kid coming out of high school who can go work on the GLTC program where there's role players. And they go out there, and for 14 to 20 days, they can actually be cabined up there for a certain period of time while they're in rotations. And they'll pay for your lodging, and you come out there and you role play. That's $10, $15 an hour for a kid coming out of high school who doesn't have any resources. But I tell people about these jobs, and they just, what Fort Polk has to do. I know it's about an hour drive away, but if there's any way where y'all can make that connection, there's a lot of opportunity.
There's a rail that goes right up through there. Right? You got to cross the railroad track to get to Fort Polk. So yeah, you know, And I think we have to start thinking regionally. From an economic standpoint, and I guess it could be a cultural standpoint as well, there's this concept of a super region, right? That is kind of starting to trickle about this idea of how do we connect, Lake Charles, Lafayette, DeRidder, and even in Southeast Texas as well. I mean, we've got to see us, especially here in Lake Charles, I think we've got to see ourselves as in the middle of two grounds, and we got to play it. I mean, ain't no even saying, we're only going to be faithful to one side. We're on the board, and I think we should play both sides of the fence to make sure, how do we connect to Beaumont? How do we connect to Orange? How do we connect to these places? And especially within our own state, like you said, a place, for example, like Fort Polk. How does a kid get to, if he can get to Grumman, he can get to Fort Polk. That connection seems like something that could be easily made as well. So I agree.
Just I wanted to throw it out because she's always, you got somebody that can work? So I can ask around, but there's a lot of jobs out there, and there's a lot of turnaround too. So.
All right.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay.
Brilliant ideas. I love what you said because I'm in that older generation, so I can relate to some of the activities on this side. Love your idea about the boroughs because it also New Orleans is the same way. You hear about here for 9th District and all that. Is funding? Is this part of funding where funding is going to be made available, or asking for funding? How are these ideas going to be given to whomever that's going to make decisions? Is that what's going to happen? I mean,
Yes, ma'am.
go ahead.
Yes, ma'am.
He's a man with a pocketbook.
Yeah, that's right.
And so the ask has already been made of the Biden administration. The governor has sent a request for $3 billion for the state of Louisiana. If that money is appropriated by Congress and eventually trickles down here at the local level, obviously a good bit of that money would come to Calcasieu. But the purpose of this recovery framework is to develop a plan so that when the federal dollars start rolling in, we have projects ready to go.
Okay, so funding, let's just use what, I forgot your name, this young man said, and what Brandon
Brandon.
said as an idea. Yes, as an idea. So, because when you talk about post-recovery and all the stress and emotional strain people are experiencing, when you start to beautify or when you start to bring them back to certain things, that gives them encouragement. So funding could be available for such a project, like, because when he said Ball's Auditorium, well, you took me way back. Because when I was a
James
kid,
Brown.
we had daytime
That's
dances,
somebody
am I
told me.
right? Daytime dances, then when I got of age, it became a nightclub for me, so I went from the dancing. And Mr. Bowles has such a rich history in this community, from employing people and programs he started, but a lot of people don't know that, but I know that because I was a kid and I, hear his name. So when you start hearing those things and you bring that back to people like me and even you younger ones who didn't actually live it but maybe heard it, I think that gives you some hope inside, like, oh yeah, this is not just Ball's Fried Chicken, this is a little deeper. That, what he had to offer, and there are many others as well. I'm sitting thinking about, people speak of Enterprise a lot, but Railroad Avenue, you remember that? Girl? So when you start bringing the history in that alive, I think that gives people some hope. So the funding could cover projects such as this? Okay, so that
So
I
when
really
the
love.
plan is developed, it's gonna be crucial, someone said it earlier, as the police jury is putting all this stuff together, if there's something in there that you wanna see happen, you're gonna have to go to the meetings, you're gonna have to speak up.
Yeah.
And to say that this is important to our community to have this particular project as part of some of the plans.
Yeah, because this is the original part of the city.
Yeah.
And see, a lot of people do not know the history of the city, just this part before there was any, I remember just fields in South Lake Charles. You remember that? I mean, it was just, and so if people realize coming here, you're coming to some rich history. So that should give you a level of pride, not that we're an afterthought because we're here, this is just something, this is rich history. And that this is valuable property on this end of town. So when you start doing projects like what Brandon said and what Braylon said, it adds value. Because now you're saying, we're gonna celebrate your Balls Auditorium, we're gonna celebrate your Ebony Theaters, we're gonna celebrate your Railroad Avenue. Even if you just did programs for a day where people came and dressed like the fifties and sixties and supported those type of things, I think that brings, this area back alive and it brings some pride. So I would really, really like to see funding for both of what those gentlemen said. And even Brandon brought up, when you see it down in, closer to the downtown area, the signage that changes. And now you know you're in that district. I mean, even in New Orleans, you know what parts of the city you can go to for certain things. And I really think that is valuable and would bring some life.
Terry, and as we're coming to the end, I think the valuable question is, I think for kind of somewhat of a final question, is having worked in government for X amount of years, kind of being the resident expert with us tonight, can you share with us how essential it is to be at the table during these conversations in order to get things like we've talked about tonight done, and how best to do that going forward in the event that it is just a small group? But how best can we advocate, even if the group doesn't even grow, the voices don't get, if there's not a ton more ideas, how best even can a small group advocate for going forward in these areas?
So, short answer, crucial, in terms of being at the table, crucial. I think that there's a variety of ways that it could be done. Perhaps the most effective way is to sit down probably with the parish administration, and to talk to them, set up a meeting, meet with Brian, meet with Dane, meet with Alberto. This is a good group of people that can be representative of a group that can go to them and sit down and just make sure that they kind of understand where you guys are coming from, where we're coming from, as it relates to these issues or these concerns. I think that is the starting point. And then I think secondly, and maybe this is first, but working with your elected officials from this particular area. So if it's jurors, obviously that's Mr. Smith, Mr. Lewis, I'm forgetting somebody, but Tony perhaps, and then certainly on the city council, you know, whoever is in those positions at the time.
Okay.
Under the infrastructure part, you did say something about dilapidated buildings, but were you also speaking of homes?
Yeah, we had one of the functions we talked about was housing,
Okay.
and that was right before infrastructure. But if you have anything to add to it,
No, I'm just curious, I did see how, that's what I was really trying to
Yes.
get for. Was the conversation geared toward what to do next with the houses? They weren't getting attention prior to the storm, and now you really can see it. What should be done with those buildings, how to hold the homeowners accountable, is that what the?
we did discuss some accountability. We discussed resources, and making sure people have access and what to do to get our citizens back into their homes. We did not necessarily discuss dilapidated homes that were pre-disaster and how are we gonna correct that now. But we did address, landlords, slumlords. We talked about people, is making it worth the investment to invest. We talked about bonds. So yes, I don't know if anybody wants to add to what she's asking about.
There will be a report that they're typing in, there's twofold. The deadline to submit to the parish is tomorrow.
Okay.
But
So-
at what time? Okay.
Wasn't it, you know what?
The survey, what is the actual deadline? Because if we can send this link out to people
Tomorrow is
tonight,
deadline,
Yeah,
but
well, I don't know if it's a certain time.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if it's certain time. I'm just saying,
Yeah,
at
so-
the end of the day.
Okay, so this, one part, we're submitting all the comments there. The other part, we're actually creating a report. And so that report of all the comments that was made today will be made available. So you definitely would be able to have a copy once it's all, drafted up.
anyone else?
This has been awesome.
Oh, it has. And I want to thank everybody on behalf of Braylon and his team, and Melanie and Mr. Wallace. Thank you for being here. Tarek, thank you for being here. Brandon and Ms. Webb and Sister Adrena. Thank you, Elijah. Thank you all for your insight and input. We need to have more meetings like this and get more people here. It's very important that our community is educated and they have an opportunity to voice their opinions. And so I think that power comes in small numbers just as much as big numbers. And so this report will be written up and submitted as part of the survey for them to have on record. And if you have any questions, get with Tarek. Anything? Okay.
No, thank you, I appreciate it. Thank you all for coming tonight, and please sign in if you leave us your email.